where you stand. I just want to, kind of see how you stand when it comes to speaking. You have done online tests, so you must know, you must have some idea about the speaking test. Otherwise, I will give you a very brief introduction to the speaking part of the IELTS exam. So as you know, the exam takes place on an average about 15 minutes. Okay, one second, let me just share my screen with you. And right, so it takes about 15 minutes. The examiner will start. There are 3 parts. So the examiner will start with an introduction. They will ask you, since you are a professional, he or she might ask you about your job, your hobbies, or something like that. Then they move on to part 2, which is called the cue card or the topic card. You will be presented with a question, and you will get 1 minute to prepare your answer. At the end of that, you have to speak without any interruption for 2 minutes. After that, in part 3, they will ask you more in-depth questions, more general questions related to the topic of part 2. Now, this might sound easy, but if you haven't had the practice, there might be an issue, especially like you said, lack of ideas will be very evident in part 2 and 3. Now, what are the criteria on the basis of which you will be assessed? Okay, in case you don't know, I'll just take you through that as well. These are the major factors, the most important criteria for your assessment, starting with pronunciation. What does that mean? Nafia, do you know what is meant by that?
Whether I pronounce a word correctly, or whether I say a word correctly.
Yes, pronunciation means if you are pronouncing words correctly. You don't have to sound like a native person, but you should avoid any serious mistakes. Also, intonation is very important. Okay, because in part 2, if you're narrating an experience, you should show that experience, right? You should be giving that emotion. You can't say, I was very happy when I got 90%. It sounds very robotic, but you should be saying it like, I was so happy when I got 90%. That emotion, that is what we call intonation, the rise and flow. Fluency and coherence is very important as well. Fluency is the flow. Okay, and you should not be pausing too much. So many students, they say a lot. That needs to be avoided. Your answer should be logical and to the question, relevant. And of course, grammar is very important throughout IELTS. You must have seen it in writing, etc. It's super important. And also lexical resources or vocabulary. If you're aiming for a high band, okay, especially above 6.5, your vocabulary should be very good. You should be using a few less common words, and you should be using idioms, phrasal verbs. A few native-like expressions are really important. Now, before we move into the topic card, let's choose a very relevant, IELTS is always about certain topics. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to show you a topic card, a cue card. Okay. Since I already know that you're a professional, let's skip part 1. And I will give you, like in the actual exam, I'm going to give you 1 minute to think of your ideas and prepare your answer. At the end of 1 minute, I want you to speak on this topic. I will not interrupt you, and then we can look at where you stand and what we can do to improve, okay? So give me a second. Let's go with, yes. Okay, let's go with this question. To describe an environmental problem that the world is facing. These are the subpoints you should include in your answer. And I'm going to give you 1 minute to prepare your answer. Okay? Your time starts now. Okay, now, yeah, that's time. We can start speaking now.
the environmental problem that the world is facing. So I would say that the most important problem that the world is facing right now in terms of environment is global warming. And I think what's happening is that a lot of humans and the pollution that they are responsible for, they're kind of ruining the environment by a lot of ways. And I think that is leading to the depletion of a lot of the glaciers are melting, and then we're getting very weird climate changes that's happening, and we don't really get a monsoon at a monsoon or a summer at a summer now. We have snow in March, stuff like that's happening, and what can be done to prevent this environment problem? I think we should be more aware and we should be taking care of the environment, and kind of use stuff that are not that are biodegradable and that are not ruining our environment.
Okay, all right. So you spoke for about 1 minute and 15 seconds. Not bad. How do you feel? Do you feel confident in your answer? Do you feel that you gave a good answer?
No, I feel I don't really know how to get rid of the ums and ahs in between.
No problem. Okay.
So
Yeah,
I
we will.
like there's no ideas that came up. So environmental problem is not something I am interested in at all. And
Yeah.
that's a bad thing to say, but I am not interested. I'm not interested in anything. I've not seen anything about this, so I don't know anything about this much.
Okay. Well, based on the assessment factors, I will tell you, first of all, your grammar was really good. Okay, you did not make any mistakes, so that is really good. And the pronunciation as well, I couldn't notice any major pronunciation errors. So these two aspects you have done really well. But your answer was not good when it comes to, of course, ideas. Okay, you didn't give a lot of ideas, which is very necessary in the cue card. You should be speaking at length. Okay, 1 minute is not sufficient. You should be aiming for 2 minutes. All right, otherwise it shows a lack of ideas. And when it comes to fluency, the ums, the ahs, the pauses, and fluency and coherence, we call it. So coherence means how clear, how logically structured your answer is. Now, you gave me a few things here and there, but they were jumbled together. There wasn't a clear, progression of ideas, which will really cost you. So these two areas were a problem for you. Now, when it comes to ideas, you are not very enthusiastic about the environment, which is understandable, which is okay. But what we can do, right? I won't ask, and this is not a topic which we come across in a movie or something you enjoy watching. So since you have a lack of ideas, I'm not going to give you ideas. What I want you to do is we're going to take a look at a video, okay? Just a little bit of that video. I just want you to watch, pay attention to what the person says, and after that, see if you can improve on your answer. See if you can use some of those ideas. See if you can give a better answer to the same question, okay? All right, here we go. Let me know if you face any issues.
Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have released over 1.5 trillion tons of carbon dioxide, or CO2, into the Earth's atmosphere. In the year 2019, we were still pumping out around 37 billion more. That's 50% more than the year 2000 and almost 3 times as much as 50 years ago. And it's not just CO2. We're also pumping out growing volumes of other greenhouse gases such as methane and nitrous oxide. Combining all of our greenhouse gases, we're emitting 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents each year. And emissions keep rising. But they need to get down to zero. In recent years, the consequences have become more serious and visible. Almost every year breaks some horrible record. We've had more heat waves, the most glaciers melting, and the lowest amount of ice ever recorded at the North Pole. Of the last 22 years, 20 have been the hottest on record. The only way to limit this rapid climate change is to decrease our collective emissions quickly. But although all countries agree on this goal in principle, they do not agree who is responsible or who should bear the heaviest load. The developed countries point at their own efforts to reduce emissions and the fact that the large developing countries on the rise, especially China, are currently releasing much more CO2. On the other hand, developing countries argue that emissions by the West are lifestyle emissions, while for developing countries, they are survival emissions. Others call rich countries hypocrites that got rich by polluting without restraint and now expect others not to industrialize and stay poor. So, who is responsible for climate change and CO2 emissions? And regardless of the past, who needs to do the most today?
Okay. So, Nafia, this was a very brief, like an introduction to a video on the subject. Now, maybe you can use some of those ideas to give a better answer, perhaps a few vocabulary, perhaps new perspective on ideas, right? So can you try that again?
So do I start the answer again?
It's up to you, or you can speak based on that video, some ideas that you got from the video. This is especially useful in part 3 of the discussion, because most of the time the cue card can be personal, and I will show you a strategy how to answer those kind of questions. But usually in part 2, right, the general discussion, say people concerned this, you can answer what causes climate change. You get a few points from the video. Do you think all nations are equally responsible? So these kind of questions, you could get a fresh perspective by watching videos. And also videos are more visual, like it's easy to retain that information. You might remember bits and pieces, and of course, more vocabulary, better vocabulary is something that videos will definitely help you with. So you don't have to answer it like a cue card. We will come to that later on. You can simply provide me more ideas now that you have watched a video on the subject.
Okay, so I think the video also spoke about global warming the way I spoke about global warming, and I think the video kind of answered the questions that I did not know. So like, why is it happening? What harmful effects does it have? And what can be done to prevent this environment? So all these questions, I think now after I watched the video, I kind of know that, it's because of greenhouse gases, and it's because of the lifestyle in a lot of countries and the industries in a lot of countries. And I've also taken down that it's we're producing 3 times more CO2 than we used to produce like 20 years ago, which is 15 million tons now. And also I think because of, what has it done to the environment is that heat waves have begun, and glaciers have started to melt. And then in the North Pole, we have the lowest ice, the lowest ice percentage, I think. And then there's also what can we do to prevent is we can decrease collective emission. So it kind of says that we have to be more aware of what we're doing and what we're using, so that it starts from an individual and the society or the community can take over from them. That's I think that the video.
All right, very good. So see how much more ideas you're able to get just by spending about 2 minutes on a topic, right? So this is one way. And now let me, these are some of the common topics, okay? Not that they will always be, but these are the main umbrella topics, and the questions will come under one of these. So if you spend, or if you can watch videos on these topics like technology, health, etc., you will be able to give better ideas. Instead of simply saying because of human actions, you will be able to say because of industrialization, this has happened, or because of our collective emissions, this has happened. So that particular word will make your answer sound more, it will give more clarity, it will give more quality to your answers. Okay, and this is the way you can get a high score in speaking. Now, so again, you have more ideas now, and what you need to do is put them in a more coherent, progressive manner. And for that, creating a mind map is super useful or super important. How you can do that is take a look at these question words. Okay, in English, we have a few question words that start with WH. We also have another one, how. You're a professional, you already know some of these, I believe. Now, when you get any cue card, if you feel you don't know how to place those ideas, if you don't know how to gather those ideas in a good way, what you can do is you can create a mind map. Okay, keep that central idea, the topic. So you have chosen global warming or climate change. You're going to keep it at that. What is it? What is global warming? You can just give a brief introduction. In your answer, you did not give an introduction, which is not very good. So you can start with an introduction. What is it?
So global warming is a climate change that's occurring because of the greenhouse gases that's occurring because of the irresponsibility of our, of citizens or of individuals and how we're contributing to the pollution of the country.
Okay.
That's what global warming is. It's a kind of climate change.
Absolutely. So without simply jumping into the points in the question, you can give a brief introduction to that subject, okay? Irrespective of the topic, if it's global warming, if it's something about technology, you can say, well, technology is very relevant nowadays. Just a brief introduction to that. Then why is it happening? Now, based on the video, we saw it is industrialization, emissions, how, based previous years, it was constant, but now it is rising up. Just all that information you can place in the why aspect. Similarly, where it is happening all over the world. So if you don't have ideas, this is one way to make ideas, okay? Where it is happening all over the world. But if it was a more personal question, you can clearly answer, where did this happen or where did you go? Okay, this is one way. Then who won't be very relevant here, or you can say who is responsible, right? It is very difficult to answer, but developing countries as well as developed countries are equally responsible for this. Then how can we battle it? How can we tackle it? And basically the story. So usually for a cue card, there is going to be a final point which has to be talked about or explained or elaborated. In this particular question, it was how can we tackle it, I believe. Yes, what can be done to prevent this problem? So in that story aspect, you could elaborate that. In my opinion, or I believe that the ideas that you got from the video, which were we need to decrease our collective emissions, we need to, what were the other points that you mentioned?
We have to kind of be very aware of ourselves, like of the things that we use.
Awareness. And of course, the role of developed versus developing countries, you could speak about that. That will be especially useful. See, do you think all nations are equally responsible? You can even make this answer sound like, sometimes the cue cards are describe an issue that you read in a magazine recently, or you watched recently, or something like that. So there you can say, well, I happened to see a video on climate change recently, and then you can elaborate on that video. So this is one way. You see, videos is really useful because you will remember more things when you watch a brief video. And since IELTS is about a few topics, you can always, spend 2 or 3 minutes a day, and this is not going to cost you anything. And that way you're going to, and this is also going to help you when it comes to your writing. In the academic writing part, task 2, which is an essay, often the questions are to write an essay on a certain topic. Now, if you have a lot of ideas, better ideas, it is going to make your essay stand apart from the rest of the students. And this is one surefire way to get a good score in IELTS. And speaking, of course, it comes with practice. Your fluency will increase or improve once you have more ideas. Okay, so don't worry about that, Nafia. It takes more practice, but the idea aspect is something you can work on using this interactive method, using videos, using mind mapping. A lot of techniques we can learn about that in our classes. So I hope that was useful.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Do you have any questions for me?
No, that's
all right. Okay, then it was